good morning or good afternoon, everyone, wherever you are in Facebook land. We hope you come and watch us. And this is Leslie and Coach Susan. We're going to talk today about a very important topic. So if you are live with us, you know how we roll. We kind of like to hear from you. It says, oh, wait a minute, remove, hold on. All right, Susan, sorry. It was saying it can't broadcast to Instagram, and I wasn't trying to broadcast to Instagram, so I just had to remove that. Hi, guys. Let us know that we are live. We just had a little technical glitch, so I don't know what happened, if we're still here or not. So before we get started, if you could just let us know that you're here and you see us, that would be great. And I'm going to change that so that we look a little bit. Does that look better or not? What do you think? I don't see anybody here. So let us know that we're live, and then we'll start talking to you. Meanwhile, we're going to talk to ech other. There we are, Deb. Hi, Deb. Tell us, does this look better or does this look better? You tell us which looks better, the bigger or the littler one. So
I feel more comfortable far away, but
you can see and hear us. Okay. All right.
Yes.
Great.
Hi. Yeah, we've got a few people here. It looks like about 50.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for commenting.
Welcome. Yeah, we had a little tech glitch in the beginning, so I'm glad you're here now. Oh, let's take a deep breath for a minute. Susan, you talk. I'm going to cough.
Oh, Leslie has been speaking at a conference, and so her voice is tired. So bear with us today as we try to go live here. We've got a lot of people here today. Somebody even from Switzerland.
Oh, Diane
Glad
from
to have you.
Valley. I'm in Prescott, so I'm about right up the road from you. So good to see you. Hello, everyone. We're talking about three critical heart changes that we need to see to show evidence of repentance. So I'd just like to ask you, Susan and I have a list, but we'd like to ask you, what do you think you would look for to know that someone in their heart, not just in their actions, because people can fool us with their actions sometimes. They can do something for a little bit. You know, they can act nice for a little bit. They can be charming. They can be loving for a little bit. And I'm not saying that don't look at that. You want to look at that for sure. You definitely want to see that. But what's behind that? All right. So if I'm going to act loving to manipulate you, that's a very different heart motive than if I'm going to act loving because I love you and because I want to serve you and because I'm sorry for what I did. Right. So we want to look at both. We don't want to just look at the heart because we can't really see the heart. We just see the heart's actions. But what would be some of the heart changes that you would want to see if you thought someone was really, truly, genuinely repentant? From what to what? What would be some of the things that you would be looking for? Bigger. We look better, bigger. Okay. Here we go. And we're going to go bigger. Sorry, Susan. All right. Is that better?
That's okay. Yeah. And Stephanie's saying consistently showing fruit of the Spirit and humility.
Okay. Yes. So humility would be one of them, right? So a person who's not repentant is prideful, right? They're prideful. And so they have a proud heart and they're stubborn or they're rebellious in that prideful heart. And so when we see someone change into repentance, you have to start by lowering yourself. The Bible says, blessed are the poor in spirit, right? So the poor in spirit is the humble, for they shall be filled, so that we have to humble ourselves to apologize, to be genuinely repentant. We have to humble ourselves and admit that we were wrong. No excuses, that we own what we did was bad, that it hurt people, and we humble ourselves. So if you see that, that's a good sign. Now, what are the actions of a humble person? What might a humble person do versus a proud person do? What would be some of the differences that you would see? What would be some of the fruit of the Spirit of humility? Like gentleness would be the fruit of the Spirit of humility, right? Versus arrogance. Any other fruit of the Spirit that you would see from a humble heart?
So Susan's saying giving up control.
All right. I'm not right about everything. I don't know everything, right? So there's this, I don't try to manage your life because you're a better expert at your life than I am, right? And I am humble now that I'm not going to keep doing that. What other fruit would you see from humility? Right? And humility shows up. You can tell whether someone's proud or humble. You can tell that, especially over time. Right? If you give them feedback, right? If you say, hey, your voice is scaring me right now. You're getting kind of loud. A humble person says, oh, let me think about that. Even if they're not sure they agree, they're at least going to listen. Whereas an arrogant, prideful person will tell you that's not true. And, and they'll get very defensive. They'll get very defensive when you give them feedback. So these are really important qualities that we're going to talk a lot about in our webinar on the 29th. If you haven't signed up for it already, let me put the link on the banner. Hold on, let me do that right now. Okay, so that's going to be a webinar that we're going to do is how long do you keep trying and what are some of the signs? But we're going to share them even here. What are some of the signs? So humility would be one. I'm going to read to you a Bible verse that I think can help us understand this whole process. So we were talking about this earlier. In Ephesians, Paul is talking about changing. Remember when he's talking about put off your old self and put on the new self? And so he's talking about what does this look like, this putting off and putting on, right? Because that's what happens when you're repentant. You're putting off your old sin and you're putting on the fruit of the Spirit. You're putting on the character of Christ. You're putting on the new man. Paul talks a lot about this in Ephesians 4 and 5. So he says this, he says, so we're in Ephesians 4:25, and we're going to go from 25 to 28. So stop telling lies, right? So this is one that you put off your lies. You stop telling lies, you're gaslighting, all the things that I see in the feed. Let us tell our neighbors the truth, for we are all parts of the same body. Don't sin by letting anger control you. That's going to put off, right? But you have to want to do that, right? You have to want to do that. That's the repentant humility. Don't sin by letting anger control you. And then in verse 28, he says this, if you're a thief, quit stealing. Now, if you're a thief, think about this. You're stealing from others. What kind of heart does that? What's the motivation for stealing? If I steal from you, even if I steal credit for your accomplishments, if I steal, items from your house, if I steal, your self-esteem by putting you down, what kind of heart does that? What kind of heart does that? Okay, Lori's saying envy, that could be a selfish heart. Leslie's saying a selfish heart, an entitled heart, right? I'm entitled to take from you. I'm entitled to take, I'm more important than you are. So there's pride there. There might be envy. There's certainly selfishness. There's entitlement, which is a huge problem for people who live with abusers. They're entitled. They feel entitled to hurt you. They feel entitled to take from you. They feel entitled to control you, all of that. So Paul is saying, hey, if you're a thief, you have a selfish, entitled heart. But listen to what he says. If you're a thief, quit stealing. So we're not just looking for behavior change. Yes, we are looking for behavior change, but it's more. Stop stealing. Stop letting anger control you. Stop telling lies. So you have to stop certain behaviors. But here's what else he says. Instead, use your hands for good, hard work, and then give generously to others in need. Now, what has to change in order for you from being a taker, I stole from you, to being a giver? So what kind of heart is that different? An entitled heart takes. What kind of heart gives? Okay, your heart takes. Never partner with a thief, right? Bitter resentment. What kind of heart gives? Yeah, dismissive of another person's personhood for sure. Yeah. So the Bible
generous heart.
A generous heart. Yeah, a generous heart. Yeah. So now we've gotten two: entitled, prideful to humility, and entitled to generous. So how might that look in a situation that you're in? So one sign is if you say no to someone, like, hey, I want to come home. I'm not going to go to counseling unless we can go together. I'm not going to do this unless you do that. I'm entitled to call the shots. I'm entitled to tell you what to do. I'm feeling proud enough that I can call the treatment plan, right? You're hearing that. And you're thinking, okay, well, now he's at least willing to go to counseling with me. No, if you said, no, I don't think that's our best option. Or no, I don't want to reconcile until I see some real changes. An entitled heart will give you a lot of grief about that. A generous heart will say, well, that makes me sad, but I understand why you aren't ready. They're generous with you. They don't feel entitled to take from you that you need to give to them. You need to give them love. You need to give them affection. You need to give them your time. You need to give them a yes. You need to give them what they want all the time, which was the entitled heart, right? So we're looking for these shifts in why they do what they do, not just that they do new things. Stop stealing. Okay, great. But what else? Are you working now so that you can support yourself? And are you working now so that you can be generous to others? Right? That's what Paul talks about in those changes. We're changing on the outside and we're changing on the inside, both. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Leslie says this, and I think this is interesting. My husband panders to me, people pleases. Everything about me becomes about him. Right. So that's a much more covert way of controlling, like, because he can act so offended when you don't let him and you don't want him doing all that. And you say, I'll do it myself, or I'm going to go hang out with my girlfriends for a while. You're kind of hanging on me too much, or whatever it might be. You're, after all I do for you, you treat me like that. Right. So you're not allowed to say no or be apart from him, because his love is consuming in order to feed something in him. And it's not really love then. Right. Yeah. Okay. Respectful of boundaries. Absolutely. You're getting it. You're getting it. So when we're doing our webinar on the 29th in 2 weeks from yesterday, we really want you to get that, because you might be, it may not be you, maybe your girlfriend is in an abusive marriage and she's thinking about taking someone back or trusting him again or whatever. And you're seeing evidence that there isn't this humility. There's a demandingness. There's an entitlement. There's not this humility that's saying, of course, I understand why you don't want to be around me and you're scared of me. I don't want you to feel those feelings anymore. And I'll prove it to you that I'm not going to be that way, but I'm not going to demand that you change just because I'm changing right now. You need to see that over time, right? That would be a humble response.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of your thoughts, Susan?
Yeah, and I think you'll see a shift from being coercive and manipulative and demanding to really, having gratitude in the Lord. When somebody is able to receive from the Lord, they feel like they have more to give, right? Instead of having this kind of mindset of needing more and wanting more.
Mm-hmm. Trisha has a question here. What's the difference between saying how he wants things and you saying the same with how you want things with your boundaries?
So I'm not sure what that means. Do you have some ideas about that, Leslie? I'm trying to understand what she's meaning.
If it's so, I want to go. Let's see. I don't want to be yelled at. Okay, so that's a boundary. I want ice cream for dinner is different. That's not a boundary. That's a desire. So we're not sure if you're talking about, I want to go to the mountains for our vacation. I want to go to the beach, and that's a compromise, because that's not a boundary, right? But I want to feel safe with the person I'm living with, right? I want to be treated with dignity and respect. And he might say, I want to be treated with dignity and respect too. Okay, you both have those boundaries. That's fine. So what does that look like for you? What does that sound like? So for him, it might look like, you never disagree with me. You always do what I want. Respecting me means letting me be the head of the home, which means to him, I could control everything, right? And you might say, that's not what those words mean to me. So where do we go from here? Because I'm not willing to do that. Right? So that's where the bigger conversation has to come, whether it's just a want, like I talked about, or if it's a true boundary. This is where I'm staking my stake in the ground, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think having that willingness to have a dialogue and understand each other is important. And that's part of, I think, a heart change, because somebody that has the heart of God wants to understand, wants to be generous toward the other person, and make sure that they're meeting your needs, right? If they can do that.
Yeah. So Trisha clarified, she says, using your counseling example, he's ready to go to marriage counseling, but you don't think you're ready, as he needs to do his own work. So this is, I think, where a good conversation, you can see whether there's gratitude and humility in this conversation. So I think this is where you can say, and use the example, I see marriage counseling as something we need to do at one point because you've broken trust in our marriage, right? You've broken trust through adultery or addictions or abuse, whatever. You've broken trust. So I definitely agree with you that marriage counseling is something that we will need to do at some point. But until you can figure out what's going on with you, that you keep doing this or that you feel entitled to do this or whatever, I'm not sure marriage counseling is the best first use of our money and first use of our time. Because if you don't deal with you and why you do these things and what's going on with you, then I can't ever trust that you won't do it again. So I'm not really willing to rebuild trust, the foundation of why you do what you do, and you haven't gotten the help that you need for that. So, so unless you're willing to do your work on that, why you're drinking so much or why you keep going back to drugs or why you keep, doing whatever he's doing, that's repeating broken marriage. That's sort of like the termites. I see that we have termites in our marriage, and marriage counseling doesn't take care of termites. Marriage counseling fixes the damage termites caused. And if we fix the damage termites caused without getting rid of the termites, then I don't know, if I want to do that, because I don't want to keep having termites in our marriage. Right? Hopefully that helps. But I think even sticking up for yourself and having a conversation about that in a good way shows a heart change. He might have a genuine difference of opinion there, right? Because maybe he doesn't think about it that way. And as you propose it that way, then maybe, it's like, oh, I didn't think about that. So that shows humility. It shows a generosity of willing to listen, right? And so it's just sticking up for yourself in a good way and having a conversation shows a change that's different than it was in the past, that it always had to be his way or the highway, or there was an episode to, road rage or a raging episode if you didn't agree with him. So if you can have that kind of conversation, that might show you some change.
And I love that you bring that out, because I think that's one of the things that women I work with face, is that they stop trying. And so therefore they don't know if there's heart change. And so you really have to do your own work to be prepared to press into these conversations, even though it's hard. And in the past, maybe it hasn't worked before. But if you want to know if there's heart change, you really have to move towards this conversation. You have to give some feedback. You have to say no sometimes and see what comes.
Your boundaries, yeah. And see if he can respect those and if he can honor you and care about your needs as an equal partner and not just his needs as an entitled, selfish heart, right? And I think that's where you're going to find that out. But there might be some growth that you need to do. And I agree with you, Susan, that a lot of times we become either so angry, and that's the only way we can maintain our boundaries, because we're just furious. And if we aren't furious, then we're passive and accommodating, and then we have no boundaries. And so really learning to have those conversations and have your boundaries and stick up for yourself, but do it in a non-aggressive, non-angry way can be really powerful.
Yes. So that's part of what you're going to be talking about on the 29th, right? Is how to dig in and do your own work and kind of learn these new skills so that you can see if there's heart change.
Right. And it's not a waste of time. It says, how long do I try? How long do I wait? Stop thinking of it in terms of time, because time gives you time to work on you. Even if the marriage is failing, even if you're not working on the marriage because he won't do it, that tells you something. But then don't just wait and do nothing. Wait and do your own work, so that if he does say he's changing, you are at a place now completely different that you can tell. Then you're not going to go around the same merry-go-round again, because you've done your work. You can have these conversations. You can detach. You can set boundaries. And we will talk about that during the webinar. Yeah, Molly said, I'm in this situation. He said he would make an appointment for therapy, asked for 2 weeks to do so. 3 weeks have passed. I asked that he did that before my mastectomy. Here I am 2 days post-op, tried to point that out. He has time to take care of, he has time, tried to point that out. He has time to go take care of making appointment today. It turned into gaslighting, deflecting conversation again, where he got loud. Okay, so I wouldn't bring it up again, right? Because marriage counseling is not marriage. His therapy is his issue. You didn't hesitate to make an appointment for your breast, right? You knew what you had to do. You said, oh my gosh, if I don't do this, I could die. I've got to do this. And you did it, right? Because you had a heart that wanted to live. his heart isn't into going. He's feeling arm twisted by you to go, right? Which is absolutely not going to do him any good or you any good, because he's going to go into the counselor saying, my wife told me I had to be here. Oh, why do you? Because my wife told me I had to. She's just been, angry at me and she's unforgiving. Oh, you need to have boundaries with your wife. And that's how it's going to go when you're in the counseling, which is going to go nowhere for you. It's going to go nowhere. So I would suggest to you, Molly, that you say to him, hey, I apologize. I am totally wrong for demanding you go to therapy. You didn't demand that I go to the doctor. I went to the doctor because I felt a lump in my breast and I knew I needed help. So if you think you need help, then you go. If you don't think you need any help, then don't go. Don't go because I'm telling you. Right?
Yeah.
And then see what happens. Especially if you can say that in a good heart. Right? Because if he doesn't go, that's telling you gobs right there. And you might not like what you're seeing, just like he might not like if you chose not to have surgery. But it tells you something. It tells him you're going to die soon. And it's telling you your marriage is probably going to die soon. Right? And so information is gold, even if you don't like the information, because it gives you understanding, and God calls you to walk in the truth, not what you want it to be, but what it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Leslie and I have both been the therapist in that room, right? And so I know that therapy in itself does not cause change, right? It's an avenue by which somebody can choose to change if they want to. So even if your husband agrees and goes to counseling, if he's not willing to do the work once he gets there, there's not going to be change anyway. So you may be able to push and prod him to get him to sit on that couch in the therapy room. But if his mind is not engaged and he's not willing to really apply what he's learning there won't be change anyway.
And also, you have to, when you go to therapy, the therapist is going to say, if they're a good therapist, what brings you here?
Mm-hmm.
And he's going to answer the question as if he's the victim of you. Right? Just like if you came to therapy, you might say, oh, my husband's abusive and I need help, right? And we would believe you and we would help you, right? And so he's going to come into therapy, not, hey, I've been, a horrible husband and I want to be a better man, because he's not having that felt need. He's not having that, or he would be making the appointment, right? So his heart isn't changed. And that tells you something, that whatever change he does on the outside is going to be unsustainable, because it's just done to please you, not to please God. And because his heart is, oh my gosh, I have been a rotten husband. I need to learn how to be a better husband. That's what I want to do, right? Even if it's hard. Just like you had pretty serious surgery right now, not because you wanted to have surgery, but because you wanted to live longer, right? And so you made a decision, I have to get help for my cancer in order to have a better shot at living. And you did it. And you went through hard, and you're going through hard. He hasn't been willing to do that. So he doesn't have the internal conviction that he's got a problem serious enough to ask for help, or he's got a pride problem that's big enough that he will not ask for help. Either way, he's not going to change. Right? Do you see how important it is for you to have that discernment? And ladies, please don't push someone into counseling. I think it, just like somebody might push someone to go to the doctor. If you say, you're having chest pains, I would go to the doctor if I were you. I think this is serious. I wouldn't ignore it. Just like your husband might push you if you had a lump and, oh, it's probably nothing. No, I think you need to go check it out. But if they keep not doing it, isn't going to really, unless you go with them and say to the doctor, hey, because they could go to the doctor and say, my wife told me to be here, but really nothing's wrong. I'm just trying to please her. And the doctor's not.
Then what?
Yeah.
And the other part of that is then he's going to say, I did what you asked. I went to therapy.
Yeah.
Nothing's different.
Right. It didn't work. See, you're the nag. You're the unforgiving one. I did what you wanted and still not good enough for you, is it?
Mm-hmm.
It's not a good outcome. Yeah. So we've talked about humble, pride to humble. We looked at what humble looks like. We talked about being entitled to generous. We talked a little bit about what generosity looks like. Non-demanding, accepting of your perspective, all of those kind of things. Generous is giving to you, caring about your needs, not just his needs. What can I do for you? How can I help you? Do you need some money for the kids? You don't have to do this all yourself. I know I messed up. I'm willing to be generous instead of I'm using my money to control you to come back. right?
Mhm.
I'm entitled to my money. It's my money. If you want my money, you have to do it my way and live with me, right? The generous heart says, hey, I messed up. I'm willing to pay the consequences. If that includes paying your bills while we're separated, I'm willing to do that to show you that I'm loving you. I'm changing. I want to help us get back together, and I'll do whatever I need to do, including paying bills while we're separated, with a good heart, right? That's what a repentant person does. They take responsibility for the mess and they make amends and they don't complain about it, right? What other heart changes? What other heart changes would you want to look for?
Well, I think moving from willfulness to more of a willingness to change, a willingness to look at your own behavior, a willingness to try something different, a willingness to go through the effort. You're talking about therapy is a lot of effort. It's sort of like surgery in a way, right? It's very painful. It's very difficult, long recovery. It takes effort to do that, and a willingness to really step into that space.
Instead of having to be pushed, right?
Yes.
You don't want to have to push him to change, because nobody really changes by being pushed. They might, there are some success stories where someone pushes a child and says, hey, you need to, try art lessons, just try art lessons, try them. And you push and they go there and they, oh, I really like this. And it sticks and they get motivated to do it, right? There are some stories like that. And I'm not saying if you don't push someone to do something, they might have a change of heart, but don't keep pushing. If they're digging their heels in and they're telling you no, especially as an adult, then respect their no. And that tells you something. That tells you something.
And I'm seeing a lot of comments too, like talk is cheap, believe the behaviors. So that's the other side of it, is you may see behavior change, but behavior change doesn't necessarily mean heart change.
Yeah. Or sustained behavior change when it's not with an agenda, right? So let's say he is paying the bills, or let's say he is doing something, but then he has certain expectations, demands, entitlement that you do something for him. Like, hey, I've been paying these bills for 6 months. How much longer do we have to do this? That behavior shows his heart. Out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. So as you have conversations with this person, right, you will see what's going on in their heart. You will see it. You can't help but see it, right? So their actions will be something, but as you see what they say to you about, like, you're never grateful for anything. Why should I keep doing this for you? You're not doing this for me. You're doing this for me at one level. You're doing this for God, for you in another level. But if he doesn't see this, like, I'm generous. I'm generous as a person, not because of what somebody gives me back or does for me. That's because how I want to be. That's how I want to be. So I'm not going to not be generous just because someone upsets me with their no. I'm going to still be generous. Not foolish generous, but generous, because that's who I am. And so we're looking for their desire to be. What kind of man do you want to be? If you're going to put off something, then you're going to put on the character of Christ, right? I mean, that's what he talks about in Ephesians. And if he has no desire to do that, then he won't exercise one of the very basic fruit of the Spirit, which is self-control, right? Self-control is a fruit of the Spirit. In your anger, it says, do not sin. That requires some self-control, that I'm not just entitled to beat someone up because they disappointed me or upset me with my mouth or my hands, right?
Yeah. And I think that's why it's important not to give a list of these are the things I'm looking for from you, because someone can easily tick those boxes for a time, right? And then, like Leslie's saying, eventually they'll come to an end and say, okay, I've been doing it. Now what do I get? Right? I've done it. Now you need to give me something. Right.
Two examples in Scripture that we'll look at where we see repentance pretty obviously. So actually, I'm going to give you three. Two that shows real repentance and one that shows faking it. And I don't have let me see if I can find it in the Bible. So the first one is David, King David. So King David was a man who did something awful. He raped Bathsheba. He killed her husband, to cover up his sin of the pregnancy and all that. So it's a terrible thing he did. He did a terrible thing.
Mm.
And when Nathan the prophet confronted David, Nathan, remember that rich man who had a lot of sheep? He stole his poor man's sheep, only had one little sheep that he loved, and he stole that sheep. Right? This was not an affair. He stole Bathsheba and then harmed her and killed her husband. So when David heard that story, David was still in a place of denial and self-deception. I'm not that bad. And he said, that man's terrible. He did a terrible thing to that poor man. And then Nathan said, you are that man. Mm-hmm. When Nathan confronted David and said, you are that man, David repented. How do we know? He confessed his sin. You know, Psalm 51 is his confession of his sin. I was wrong. I was, David, you're forgiven, but here's the consequences. The child's going to die. Your kingdom's going to fall apart. These are the consequences. He didn't argue with God. He accepted those consequences, right? We saw a change of heart. He was sad. He was broken. He was repentant. And he didn't make demands on Nathan or God for any pass. I was busy. I was so tired. I was so lonely. No passes there. He didn't go there. He just stopped and accepted the consequences, right? On the other hand, in 1 Samuel 15, I'm not going to take the time to look at it, King Saul, he did something wicked too. He offered a sacrifice that he wasn't to offer. He didn't want to wait for Samuel to come. And so Saul thought he could do it. I'm God's man. He sort of became God in his own eyes, entitled to do what he wasn't supposed to do, right? And when Samuel came and called him on it, he lied. He said, I didn't kill all the sheep. I did what the Lord commanded. And Samuel said, I hear those sheep bleating. You did not do what the Lord commanded. And he goes, well, we were going to sacrifice those to the Lord your God. So now he's gaslighting Samuel. He's twisting what he's really going to do and trying to make Samuel feel stupid for confronting him. And Samuel didn't buy it. And he confronted him again. And then Saul gaslighted him again and said, well, I really am sorry. I'm going to do whatever you say, just don't leave. And if you read the account, it's pretty clear. He's not repentant at all. He's saying the right things, but twisting them a little bit for his benefit to try to confuse the prophet, which Samuel wasn't confused. And it says Samuel never saw Saul again, and Saul never really repented. And then in another passage in Luke 19, we have Zacchaeus, and you mentioned him earlier, but Zacchaeus was a selfish man. He was a tax collector. It says he was the chief tax collector. He was a very wealthy man because he extorted people and got extra money from them, his fellow Jews. They didn't like him. He had to climb the tree to see Jesus that day because the crowds wouldn't part for him to see, and he's a small man. But when he repented, what did he do immediately? Lord, half my money I'm going to give to the poor. And if I've cheated anybody, I'm going to pay them back 4 times. Nobody told Zacchaeus to do those behaviors. He did them because his heart changed from a selfish, greedy heart to a generous, humble heart. And we see this in the scriptures. We see people who did and who didn't. And we need to discern the difference.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that kind of speaks to, Sherry says, I feel like I'm never going to be able to trust anybody or anything ever again. You need to be able to discern the difference. We're all human beings, right? We're all going to fail each other at some point, but who overall has the character of somebody who's trustworthy? Being able to discern that so you know who to let into your inner circle and begin to trust is very important. That's some work that you can begin to do. It sounds like, Sherry, somebody's hurt you very deeply and you've lost trust. And so there's some things maybe you need to do to learn how to discern who might be trustworthy in your life, because we are going to need each other. And there need to be in community. There's no perfect person.
There is no perfect person, right? So all of us are going to mess up. So if you need a perfect person in order to trust them, then that's, probably not going to find that. But you do want to find the difference between a good person and messes up and is humble enough to own it and deal with it and make amends and not repeat it. And someone who messes up and makes excuses and gaslights and makes you feel like you're overreacting or too sensitive or your fault that they messed up, right? Mm-hmm. That's a very different outcome. You don't trust those people. The Bible tells us in Hebrews that we're to mature. This is what Susan says, this is your work to do. We're to mature to a place where we have our senses, our intuition trained to discern good from evil. Now, why would we need such maturity and discernment? Because he says right after that, because even Satan masquerades as an angel of light. Evil people often try to look very good. They do. And so we have to be able to discern that. That is your work to do as a Christian, to mature, because Jesus even says there's evil people in the church. They call them wolves in sheep's clothing. We're reading about them in the news every day these days, of church leaders who are wolves. They're typical wolves, but they dress as sheep and disguise themselves, and they confuse the sheep, especially immature sheep. And so this is something really important for you to learn. And this is why we're teaching you discernment. This is the heart. These are the actions. This is the heart. These are the actions.
Yeah, there's a lot of really untrustworthy people out there. Like Leslie's saying, we're hearing it all over the place. But there are people who have the character of being trustworthy. They are going to mess up. So you will find people, and you are going to need people.
Yeah. And Sherry, you just said something really profound. I don't trust myself anymore to be able to discern. It just keeps happening. And that's, something that is your humbleness there, your humbleness and your self-awareness, is good. It's very good. I don't know how to do that. Okay. But the Bible tells you that you can learn to do that, because it tells you to learn to do that, right? So if it tells you to learn to do that, then you can learn to do that. And God wants to help you do that. And I would encourage you to come to the webinar, because we will learn a little bit of how to discern that. I'm going to give you 2 very specific things, how to discern people. And it requires something from you too, to be able to have a conversation with someone so that you can discern it, so you can hear what's coming out of their mouth, that you can watch their actions, right? Because that's how we discern. Even I was just teaching a 3-hour class for the American Association of Christian Counselors, and I had a whole hour of how do we discern by someone's answers where their heart is. And this is important, like David, like Saul, like David, like Saul, those kind of things. We can see someone's heart by their answers in a conversation, even in therapy. When I ask someone, why are you here? Well, I'm here because my wife and I got smart enough to say, well, but your wife's not here. So what is it about you that upsets her? What would make it better for her if you were to change? So I'm discerning he's gaslighting me right then. And I'm going to pull him back into a conversation to see if he can go there. And he might not be able to go there, right? But that tells me something about whether he's just immature or whether he's really evil and trying to just snow me. And we need to learn to do that. And we're going to teach you how to do that in the webinar, some of that. All right, let's answer some questions. I'm going to go to the question board. What we do, we have someone who watches the feed because it goes by so fast, and we're looking at a camera. And so it's hard to look at the feed and look at the camera and have a conversation with you at the same time. And so somebody's in the background getting some questions from the feed for us. So let me grab them. All right. He says he fears the repercussions if I don't do what you want or think, which means I've set boundaries to protect myself and pull away when he doesn't treat me kindly. What do I say?
So he's saying he fears repercussions.
I think that goes back to one of the lies that entitled people believe, and that is, I'm entitled to do what I want with no repercussions. I'm entitled to do what I want with no repercussions. So I would just say to him, you're right. There's repercussions for everything that you do. If you don't show up for work, you're going to probably get fired. If you don't, pay your bills, you're going to get late charges. Life is full of repercussions. If you drive too fast in front of a cop, you're going to get a ticket. So I don't understand what you mean about being afraid of repercussions. Of course you have repercussions. If you hit me, I'm calling the police. So life is full of repercussions. And are you expecting that there are no consequences for your behaviors just because you're married to me? I'd probably say something like that. So sometimes they come out with these words that sound like they're bad words, like, oh, but it's coming out of a lie from their head. I should be able to do what I want and treat you how I want. And you just have to forgive me. And there's no consequences. That's just baloney. That's just baloney. It's not true. Even if your pastor tells you that, it's not true. It's just not true. Life is full of repercussions. And what you sow, you reap. That's what it says, right?
Yeah. And it sounds like he's putting himself in the victim and making you the bad guy, right? If I don't do everything you want, then, I have consequences. Instead of looking at really his behavior, there's a reason you're setting these boundaries.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I think that you can say to him very clearly, you have choices here. You can honor my boundaries or not honor my boundaries. But if you choose not to honor my boundaries, there are repercussions. I'm not going to hang out with you. I'm not going to sleep with you. I'm not going to, whatever your boundaries are. These are the repercussions. Now, I think we can be controlling in some ways. Someone, especially an abuser, when they start hearing boundary language and stuff, they start using boundaries as a means to control. And so we don't want to do that. So you have to really understand boundaries. Boundaries are about you, not about them. So if you say, if I catch you watching porn on the computer, I'm gonna change you can't control their porn use, right? You can control whether you want to stay married to someone who doesn't control themselves, right? But they have to control themselves. You decide what you're going to do about that, not about his porn, but about living with someone who refuses to do help for porn, right? Those are your boundaries, right? And so I think it's really important for you to understand the difference between controlling someone else. All right. So the quickest example I can give you is, I don't want you to smoke. That's my boundary. Well, you can't control whether someone smokes. That's their choice. What you can say is, if you choose to smoke, then I'm going to go in the other room, or I'm not going to get in the car, or I'm not going to let you smoke in my car because this is my car. If you want to smoke, drive separately. So those would be your boundaries. This is what I will do. This is what I won't do if you choose to do that. Mm-hmm. Okay. Another question?
Yes.
Want to get this, Susan?
My husband is nice to me 99% of the time. We don't have a close relationship, but get along okay. But when I say anything I don't like about him, how I feel, he should just step up in a couple of areas. It ends up in a raging fight. No matter how hard I try to stay calm and fail sometimes, I am cussed and screamed at. I've told him I won't consider us to have a strong marriage until he works on his own issues. He thinks it's ridiculous, that his anger is no different than in any other family. What do I do?
So this is where I would perhaps try to have a curious conversation. We call them curious conversations.
Mm-hmm.
So what we mean by that is, by giving him some feedback, not on how he's not stepping up. Obviously, he gets shamed when you tell him he's not a good enough man in whatever area. And he's a good enough man in many areas. Obviously, he's 99%. You're saying he's a good person or nice to you. But you don't have a closeness because you can't be honest about something that you feel or see in his life. So I might have a curious conversation, and I might say something like this. I might start with step one. I notice a pattern that you get really angry with me when I try to give you some feedback about something I don't like or something that I think you could do better. It really offends me that I would say something like that. Could you tell me more about, like, why is that so upsetting to you? When you tell me, hey, I'd really like you to get laundry done more often than, once a week because I'm running out of underwear. If you told me that, I'd try to think of an example where he told you something that you weren't stepping up to. I go, okay, I just, hear you, and I'm okay with that. What is it about when I tell you I'd like you to step up to something becomes so offensive to you that we have a horrible fight afterwards? I'm curious about that. So that you're inviting him to some self-reflection about the pattern, not any topic, you're not stepping up, but just the topic of, hey, when I try to give you some feedback. So that would be one way of doing it. Another way of doing it would be give an illustration. To say, when I've told you before little things like, you've got broccoli in your teeth, or I've told you here's a tic tac, we're going to talk to people, or if I've told you your zipper's down, you seem to be grateful that I have your back, that I care about you enough to tell you you don't want to talk to a colleague with bad breath. But when I tell you other things, you just get so angry that I said it, like you can't believe that I would say something like that somehow I should never give you feedback about something I think you could do better at. I'm curious, what's the difference to you? Why is it okay to do that, but it's not okay to do that? So those would be two ways that you might have a conversation about the problem of him not receiving your feedback. right? I think it's an ego issue. I mean, my thing is, it's an insecure ego. It's not a prideful ego. Usually, it's an insecure ego that can't bear to hear anything bad about themselves from someone else, that they want you to admire them. Most husbands want their wives to admire them, and so when you say, you're falling down on the job in this area, a lot of men will get very defensive and upset that you would think that of them, and so they will shut you down through their anger. Does that sound what you would see, Susan, in that?
Yeah, you made some really good points there. I'm not sure that I have anything to add to that. We've talked about boundaries, how you respond to his anger is important, by not tolerating being screamed at and cursed at, that you would protect yourself enough to leave the room. But I would start with what Leslie's saying, is have that curious conversation first. And then if it continues, then you may have to establish some boundaries so you don't have to endure that, because it can be taxing on your emotions and your body.
Yeah. And the other thing that I might have a curious conversation about is if he's a believer, his justification for the foul things that come out of his mouth. That, I'm curious, how you talk to God about what happened between us, because you seem to think that it's normal to curse me out, that's any man would curse his wife out when he gets upset with her. And yet the Bible clearly tells us not to do that. I don't do that to you. I get upset with you plenty. And maybe you do curse them out. I don't know. So but I don't do that to you. Why is it okay between you and God that you do that to me?
Yeah.
I don't get that in your spiritual life. How do you rationalize that? And he's
Yeah,
not but that would be another way of having some curious conversation.
Yes, that's a great point, because he's using the world as a plumb line. Everybody else does it. It's normal, instead of using God's word as the plumb line to what we should be aspiring to.
Yeah. And to be perfectly honest, there are men who aren't believers who don't curse out their wives when they're upset. They're just men who have certain boundaries about themselves. That's not who I am. That's not how I want to show up, even if I'm not a believer. I've met men like that they're just not going to treat other people that way, even when they're mad. And so I think it's interesting to me that he's rationalizing his behavior. And I'm curious about how that affects his relationship with the Lord, because it certainly affects your relationship with him, right? But how does that affect, in his mind, how does that affect his relationship with the Lord? All right, let me pull up another question.
Yeah, I've got one right here. You want me to read it?
Yeah, my computer keeps going black, so then I have to turn it back on.
Okay. How do I trust he will be different this time? Trying to stand my ground, but holding on to this hope. We have been living separate for 7 months and no change has happened. How long should I hold on?
Well, that's exactly what we're talking about in the webinar. So I would really encourage you to get a much more thorough answer than we're going to give you right now. But I guess I would say, how long is long enough to see no change? He has shown you absolutely no willingness to do any work on his own. So why would you keep hoping? That, it's sort of like living with a neighbor who has rusted cars in their yard for a year, and you're thinking, I'm still hoping that they're going to clean up their yard. I mean, when do you say, this is what it is? This is what it is. And, obviously 5 years from now, he might be in a different space and more open to change. But depending on what you have to live with, you have to decide how long you're going to wait to see. But God, I will tell you one very powerful truth. Nobody changes if they don't want to. Nobody changes if they don't want to, right? Nobody changes if they don't want to. And also, God doesn't change anybody who doesn't want to, right? So God can do some miracle things. When he confronted the Apostle Paul, when he was Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? He asked Saul a curious question, right? And Saul thought, oh my gosh, Jesus, you're real? You really are the Son of God? So God didn't swoop down and change Saul into Paul. God confronted Saul with his sin, and Saul went from a proud heart to a humble heart and repented. And then God changed Saul to Paul, right? And it took 3 years of isolation, right? He didn't change him like this and he became the Apostle Paul. He was in a desert for 3 years learning from God how to be Paul. And so we need to understand that God is never going to swoop down and hit your husband with a lightning bolt of transformation. It doesn't work that way. God gave him a choice as he gives you a choice. And he never violates your no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's no timeline. There's not an answer that we can give that's even typical. When I'm meeting with women, I find that as they're busy doing their work and pouring their hearts out to God and staying close to God, God answers that question for them. They just have a sense of knowing when the timing is right to stop hoping, or they get the answer that they're looking for. God will answer that.
Mm-hmm. Wendy says, how about if they do want to change, but they need deliverance? I know for sure the enemy is behind why my husband is the way he is. I think the enemy is behind a lot of sin in our life, but it still takes our willingness to do what God calls us to do. And so your husband, I don't necessarily, I've never seen anybody delivered from bad habits. I've seen someone be delivered from maybe a mindset that, is destructive a little bit. And then they start thinking a new way and then they put on new habits and things like that. But I've never seen anybody delivered from, that kind of thing in those instant, no struggle kinds of things. Sometimes they have I've had clients who have, and they wouldn't even say it was a deliverance kind of thing. In prayer, God gave them victory over a sin for a season that they didn't struggle so much with that sin. And so it was easier for them to have self-control, but then all of a sudden it wasn't. And they had to really do their work to have self-control over that sin. So God has different timing for different things in our life. But if your husband, let's say you do believe in deliverance, has he gone for deliverance? Right? So he has to have that willing heart, a humble heart. I need help. I'm desperate. The woman with the issue of blood was desperate for help. She spent all her money getting help from false healers. And when she knew Jesus was coming to town, she took a big chance because you weren't supposed to be in public if you had blood on you. And not only were you not supposed to be in public, you definitely don't touch anybody and they don't touch you. Mm-hmm. So she publicly touched Jesus and he called her on it. Who touched me? And the disciples were saying, everybody's touching you, Jesus. Everybody's touching you. And he goes, nope, somebody touched me. I felt it. Right. And she humbled herself and said, it was me. I thought if I touched you, I would be healed. So I don't see your husband, from what you said in this little 4-line thing, what's he doing to get delivered? What's effort is he saying? I need Jesus. I need help. I'm going to someone who's good at prayer ministry or prayer deliverance or whatever that is. And I'm going to go every day if I have to get a grip. Mm-hmm. Right. But I don't see that question. Yeah. I see you trying to get him deliverance, but not him.
Yeah. Sometimes it takes pursuing Jesus with everything you have to get deliverance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Leslie said, I've given up hope that husband will change. There's a really good book on all of this, and it really has to do with when to end friendships or when to fire someone from work and those kind of things. But Henry Cloud, the guy who wrote Boundaries, wrote a book called Necessary Endings. Mm-hmm. And he does have a little bit of a chapter on hope, like when do I give up hope that this person's going to change? And he says, if you've given them time and they haven't put forth the effort to make the change, stop hoping. Right? Stop hoping that they're going to make the change. If they're consistently making changes, then you can continue to hope that will continue to happen. And if they're not making the effort to make changes, why would you keep hoping? Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You ready for another one?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Our therapist says we shouldn't look at the past, just move forward and work on ourselves. But it's so hard to do when he just continues to belittle and rage, etc.
So this is what you need to tell your therapist. I'm not talking about the past. The past is the present. He still belittles and rages. Right? So when does the past become the present? When you're doing a pattern of it and you don't stop. So, so yes, if he had an affair in the past and, you're still thinking about it 15 years later and it never happened again, you have some work to do, right? Because you can't have a relationship with someone that you're holding a grudge over for 15 years and not have that relationship damaged, right? If he did his work and he rebuilt trust and he's sorry and he's not repeated that behavior, that's one piece of advice. Yes. Why aren't you having a success at putting the past in the past? But when the past becomes the present over and over again, then that whole approach is nuts. I mean, you can't forget yesterday if yesterday is like Groundhog Day. It keeps happening and keeps happening and keeps happening. So I think you need to tell your therapist, this isn't the past. This was last night. This was last week. This is tomorrow, because he hasn't changed it. So I'm not letting go of it because it's still happening and it's harmful and it's damaging to me and to us. And see what your therapist says.
Absolutely. You need to look at the past in order to see the pattern that's still happening now.
Yeah. Yeah. And we talked about this in a previous Facebook Live, but let me give you the pattern. This will help you really fast to see the pattern. When was the first time this happened? Whatever. Let's say you're saying, I'm afraid of my husband, or my husband belittles me. Well, when was the first time that happened? On my honeymoon. When was the last time that happened? Yesterday. What's a typical time? Well, you give me the typical. What's the worst time? All right. So now you've got this pattern over 30 years. You're seeing it. So if you've been married 30 years and the first time he belittled you was yesterday, then that's a very different question and a curious question than he's been belittling me for 30 years. I'm not putting the past in the past. The past is present. The past is a pattern in our marriage. It happens all the time. It's not incident by incident by incident. This is a pattern, right? And this is where you need to stand up for yourself with your therapist and be honest enough with your therapist. So your therapist is a mind reader. Like, I've had situations where I had no idea what was really going on in their house because she was too scared to tell me. And that was before I knew that I shouldn't be doing marriage counseling, right? But she was quiet, she was subservient, she was, tentative. And until finally she said to me, oh, I shouldn't have said that. And she looked at him like, it's going to be bad, isn't it? And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is far different than I thought, right? So if you can't be honest in front of your husband with the therapist, then don't go. To waste your money.
I also find sometimes when I'm counseling a couple that there does need to be some skills learned, right? Couples want to go in the past and dredge up all these hurts, but until they get in an area where they can actually hear one another and speak kindly to one another, that's not going to be productive. So learning those skills of how to be in the present with each other in a kind and respectful way is sometimes most important before you can begin to go back. But of course, it's always true that marriage counseling is not going to work in a destructive relationship. So if we're looking at destruction, maybe marital counseling is not where you need to be right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's really important, like, to be able to say, if trust were being rebuilt here, what would that look like? What would that sound like, feel like for you and for me? And it might be very different. Like I said, what does respect look like? Right. So I think those are important questions, even that the therapist can ask or your counselor can ask each other, because she might be trying, or he might be trying to do something that is completely different than either one of you are asking for or want. And maybe, what trust looks like for him is she just forgets it and moves on. That's not what trust looks like for you. Right?
Yeah, very good point.
Yeah. So my therapist, I had a similar conversation with my therapist when she told me to let go of my anger. And again, that might be a good strategy. Like, you don't have to, unless your anger is serving a purpose. It's really hard on your body to stay angry all the time, right? So there's a reason to be angry, for sure. Sin is toxic and you can be angry at sin. But if you continue to need your anger, 6 months later, after something happened to you 6 months ago, I think there is an issue that you're not dealing with, because you can set your boundaries. You can learn how to speak up for yourself. You can learn how to protect yourself and be safe without still hanging on to your anger. So what's the purpose of your anger? It usually gives us the courage and the strength to say, stop it, and I won't tolerate this anymore, right? If we've been kind of a go along passive girl. And we cry out against injustice and sin, and we should. But if we can learn to, like Susan said, if we can learn to stand up for ourselves without our anger, so that we can do it far before anything major happens, then we're miles ahead of the game in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next question.
Yeah, I can read it to you.
Yeah,
What if my husband has obvious emotional and mental health issues, but says I'm abusive and blaming if I mention he needs to seek help with them before we can move forward?
So again, seeking mental health help.
Mm-hmm.
If you're aware and you agree you have a problem and you don't seek help for that problem, what's that saying about you? Especially if you know that problem impacts someone you say you love, right? Even if you had terrible BO, if you had terrible BO or bad breath or terrible gas, and it was affecting your partner, it was affecting your love life, wouldn't you say, I care about that, I'm going to go to the doctor? So when someone refuses to go for help, what does that mean? What does that say to you? That's not a mental health issue. The mental health issue is the depression, the anxiety, the OCD, whatever the mental health issue is. But what's the unwillingness to get help for that? Pride, right? I don't want to need help. I don't want to humble myself and say I need help and ask for help and do what they say to do. I don't want anybody telling me what to do. That's not a mental health issue. That's called pride in the Bible, right? And so you have to decide whether or not, I don't think that gives him a pass. The mental health, you can have compassion. But the pride, so if he was going to the doctor and he was willing to listen to what the doctor said and he was taking his medication and he was still struggling with things that were bugging you, I think it's important for you to have compassion for that. Just like if you married someone who was in a wheelchair and they were struggling with functioning in certain ways as a other husband might function, and he can't do those things because he's in a wheelchair. You know that, and you have compassion for that. But when someone is rebellious and unwilling to do what they can to get help and function better, then that's a whole different story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we don't get a lot of that from what you put in that question. If you haven't had those conversations, it's important to start there about what you're noticing that causes you concern. Mm-hmm. It's not just, something's wrong with you, you need to get help. It's being able to have those kind of respectful conversations about what you're noticing.
Mm-hmm. And the impact on you, mm-hmm. So I think, for those of you who might be married to someone on the spectrum, the autism spectrum, the impact on you is great. And they may feel fine. And, it's your problem. And it might be your problem that you need to go get help to figure out how to minimize that impact on you. But the impact on you is still the impact on you, whether they're mentally ill, whether they're character disordered, whether they're have a Huntington's chorea genetic disease that makes them kind of nutty later on, or whether they're going into dementia and they're becoming more violent. Again, you can have compassion for all of that. But if someone's not willing to care about the impact on you and just expect you to be like, even my children and I were talking about, like, I don't have dementia, but if I have dementia as I get older, we talk about this. I don't want my inability to take care of myself to impact them, right? I don't want it to impact them, their lives. It'll impact them emotionally for sure, but I don't want them to give up their life to take care of me. But if someone doesn't care about the impact that you have on someone else because of your mental illness, because of your disability, because of whatever it is, at least you have to care about the impact. It has an impact on you. And so if someone's running around with a knife because they're paranoid schizophrenic and won't take medicine, I hope you don't live with them. You can have a lot of compassion with them, but don't put your children in that house, right? Because it's scary. It's scary and it's dangerous. And you're to steward you and your safety. And if someone's not willing to steward their safety and their mental health, you have to steward yours.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We have lots of questions coming in. You still have time, Leslie? I know we're past 1 o'clock.
Yeah. How are you doing? Because you have more of a schedule than I do.
Yeah, I'm okay.
Okay, so let's go for another 10 minutes if that's okay with you, and then
Yes, it is.
okay.
The question is when in the waiting and see period and behavior change, especially when it's a question of checking off the change list, which may be a long period of time, what would you feel is the most appropriate specific thing to pray?
I would just, pray for your husband's heart, that his heart would soften toward the Lord and that he would listen. I mean, I think the Holy Spirit speaks to us if we're Christians about what we're doing wrong. We're just not listening. We're not taking the time to listen. So, really praying for his spiritual development would be something I think you could do with, even we're called to do even for our enemies. And so we can pray that God would put things in his life that would wake him up, that God would put things in his life, hard things, good things, whatever it would take for him to wake up and want to be putting God in the number one place. And so we've talked about heart changes. So we've got the proud to humble. We talked about the selfish or the entitled to the generous. And the third one that we really want to look at is a self-centered heart to a God-centered heart, right? And a God-centered heart is one that humbles themselves and seeks God first and listens to God and takes time to listen to what God says and then makes every effort to apply that into their life, like that put off, put on thing. And again, you can't change someone's heart. Even God doesn't change someone's heart who doesn't ask to have a heart change. So that's what you can pray for, is God, do whatever it takes. And this is, I think, sometimes where we're idolatrous ourselves. We've put marriage in the God place. We're not willing to lose our marriage for our husband to wake up. What if that's what it takes? What if it takes a goodbye? I'm not doing this anymore for him to really wake up. Right? But we're so marriage focused. I can't, that would mean I failed and I have to do this, or God hates divorce. I'm not saying get divorced for a casual reason at all. But if someone has been ugly and harsh and abusive and repetitive adulterer and idolater and all of those kind of things, I think you can have boundaries and say, I can't live like this. I won't live like this. I don't think God's asking me to live like this. And maybe from that, God has his attention in ways that he would have never had his attention before. But we're so clinging to the hope that, well, God's going to fix this. Maybe God doesn't want to fix this because this is sick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so intercessory prayer is definitely important, praying for those heart changes, but also I'd be praying for you that you would have discernment and that you would resist falling into those old patterns and that you would have the support you need and that God would reveal to you what you need to know. So you can be praying for yourself as well as for your husband to change, but for you to have what you need to sustain yourself through that period and to know when to move.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Just want to remind all of you that this is our, public Facebook page. So I know some of you have been putting some pretty personal questions in here. And so, that's up to you how you do that. But, I just don't want your mother-in-law reading it and then you writing us later saying, I can't believe she read this. We can't control who comes to this page and probably she's not going to show up, but I just want to let you know that. And that's why we do a lot of our teaching on webinars, because we do want you to have, I think you find the chat helpful. I think it's very helpful to say, wow, I'm not alone. There's other Christian women who are struggling with this. There's a huge benefit in knowing that. But on the webinar, we have a chat feature, which you can actually chat with one another in a very way. Our coaches will be on there to answer your questions as we're going along. And then I stay for 45 minutes to an hour and a half after the webinar to answer your questions. And you can be more specific and more real at that point, because you don't have to worry about it being on a public Facebook page or anything like that for future people to do. And you only get that if you're live. You don't get the Q&A. We don't send out the chat. Nothing goes with the replay. You'll get a little replay of the webinar itself, but you don't get the benefit of the community in the chat, the question and answer time afterwards. And really, if this is your issue, or someone who is, or if you're in ministry to other women, 1 in 4 Christian women are in an emotionally destructive marriage. So 1 in 4. So understand, this is not a little problem. This is a huge problem. And the church has not done a good job with this. They haven't done a good job with other kinds of abuse issues as well, but especially because of their idolatry of the sanctity of marriage, they often promote till death do us part, literally, including if you're going to be the victim. And so that's not what we teach. We don't think the Bible teaches that. But if you need some help in clarifying that in your own head about what God is saying and what the Word of God is saying, and you want some help with that, please come to the webinar, and this will really help you to get clear in your own life, or maybe as you're helping someone else. We have some Christian counselors who can hang out at the webinar too, because they're realizing they're not doing some things that they need to do in the right ways. So, okay. All right. Okay. One or two more questions.
Yeah. Okay. Can someone who did truly change or repent completely backslide and go back to old ways?
Probably. Probably, because the Bible says, if you've been enlightened and you walk away from the truth, your darkness is going to actually be darker. So I think that, yes, this world is a very tempting place. And so we don't put our trust. Here's trust. If we think about trusting your husband, you need a basic level of trust and safety to live with anybody peaceably, right? You don't have to have romantic love, but you need some level of trust and safety to live peaceably with another person, even if it's a roommate, right? So you do need that. But the ultimate person that you trust is God. So that if you are in a situation where it comes to your attention that you can't trust this person, you trust that God is using this not only for their wake-up call, but for your wake-up call as well. You're learning this discernment. You're learning to set boundaries. You're learning to listen to God. You're learning to be independent of needing this person to love you in order for you to be okay, right? And so if trust gets broken, it's not, the end of the world for you. It's a wake-up call for you too on how to learn to deal with loss and grief and sadness and betrayal, which is part of living in a broken world. And these are lessons that we learn to be more mature, to have better boundaries, to have better discernment, so that we don't keep repeating the same patterns.
And it's hard for us to judge what is real change and what is not. That should be left to God, right? So you've seen what looks like real change, but you don't know if it is, right? There's been some behavior change and then a moving back to old patterns.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of someone in the Bible who, walked away from the faith. And I'm not coming up with anybody's name. Are you, Susan? Can you think of anybody in the Old Testament or,
that had a real faith? No, it's not coming to my mind either.
Yeah. So I know there's a passage that says I can't think of where it is, but it's, if you were once walking in the light and you walk away from the light becomes pretty dark for you. But walking in the light, how long that is or how deep that is, I think, I don't know. I can't answer that question for sure.
After we discern, what boundaries need to be in place?
I don't know what your boundaries would be. So you have to decide your boundaries, right? So you decide what you need or what you're willing to put up with and what you're not willing to put up with. And again, boundaries are all about you, right? So if your neighbor comes walking in your house without knocking, your boundary might be, hey, that scared me to see you in my house. Please knock before you come in. I need you to knock on my door. Okay, so that's a very mild boundary. You have a door there, but most people knock. She didn't knock. She walked in. Oh, I'm so sorry. I grew up in a small town and we always just walked in each other's houses. Well, that scared me. Please don't do that again. Okay, I won't. And hopefully they won't. That's a little boundary, right? But it's not, you're not talking about your neighbor's house. You're talking about your house and you're in the way you'd like things to happen, right? So that's a very soft boundary. But if they don't do it and they come walking in again, what are you going to do? You're going to put a lock on your door and you're going to lock it so that they don't. That's a stronger boundary, right?
Exactly.
Because I need my privacy, or I don't want to be surprised and scared when someone's in my kitchen that I didn't know was in my kitchen, right? So I think but you do that for you. You do that to take care of you. You don't do that to punish her, right? And so I think it's your boundaries. What do I need? I don't want to be around a smoker. You want to smoke? Okay, I'll drive separately. You want to smoke? okay, then I'm going to sit with you outside your house because I can't stand the smell of smoke and it gives me a headache, and I'm going to take care of me. I'm not judging you, right? So I'm not going to drive with you, or I'm not going to let you smoke in my car. If you can't do that, drive separately, right? So without judging, why are you smoking? You need to stop smoking. That's not what you want to do with other people.
Exactly. And, boundaries can be really tricky. And so it's a concept that is important to learn about. What does a boundary mean even? And how do you know yourself enough to know what your own boundaries are? My boundaries might be different than Leslie's boundaries and different than your boundaries. And so being able to pay attention to what's going on within you to even know what are my boundaries is important work, and probably something, I'm guessing, Leslie, that you're going to touch on in this web workshop in some way. Knowing yourself, being strong in yourself, and being able to decide.
What's wrong with me. Just like this woman could have felt like, what's wrong with me that I need someone to knock? She doesn't need someone to knock. Those aren't her boundaries. I can walk in her house and she doesn't mind. I wouldn't. But she said she grew up this way and people just people didn't lock their doors. They were fine with that. I'm not fine with that. I grew up in the city of Chicago and I don't want, so don't think that you have to have the same boundaries as someone else has, right? I think that's where I think we can get judgmental, or we can get legalistic, or, kind of snarly about that. I think we just say, what do I need in order for me to feel at peace or calm or safe? What do I need to feel nourished and alive? And it may be very different. What do I want to eat? What's important for me? Like, some of my family, probably if they ate a vegetable a week, that would be a good thing, right? And I eat a whole lot more vegetables than that. And so, I have to take care of me, or ask them to purchase vegetables that I would eat, and all of those kind of things. So it may not be the same for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. So Karen's saying David walked away and returned to the Lord.
Yeah, I don't know if he ever truly walked away in his heart. He certainly walked away in his behavior. I think he rationalized in his heart, like the man who might be cursing at his wife and rationalizing. That's why I think asking that question, when Nathan asked him that question, or didn't ask him, told him, you are that man, David had, conviction, because he was a man after God's own heart. That's what it says about him. Wendy's saying, I don't believe this is God's plan for his children. He says in his word that the husband is to love his wife like Christ loved the church. And what did Christ do for the church? So divorce isn't God's plan for his children, but death wasn't his plan for his children either. So sin causes problems in our world, right? And Jesus is honest enough about that to say sin is real, and it causes husbands to not love their wives. That's why in Malachi, where that famous verse has been misrepresented as I hate divorce, doesn't really say I hate divorce. It says I hate when a man doesn't love his wife like Christ loved the church. And in essence, that's what it's saying. I hate when a man treats his wife treacherously. I hate that. But God doesn't make someone do what they should do. He doesn't make you eat right. He doesn't make your husband be faithful. He doesn't make us. He gives us instructions on how we should live our life, and says, what you sow, you will reap. And so when we reap negative consequences, God said he permitted divorce because of the hardness of people's hearts. So yes, ideally God's will is, that we should have never died in the first place, or die in the first place, because we shouldn't have eaten that apple, but we did, right? Or whatever it was. We did. We believed the lie that Satan fed us. And so there's sin in this world, and there's corruption in this world, and there's evil in this world, and it affects us and it impacts us. And so how do we protect ourselves against that, especially when it's in our own house? Wouldn't it be wonderful if everybody did what God said to do?
It would be almost heavenly.
Yeah, exactly. That's what heaven is, right? Yeah. All right, friend, we are so grateful that you are here. We are going to be doing some Facebook Lives again next week. I think we're taking the weekend off. I'm going to be away Monday, Tuesday. I have a meeting in Florida that I will be tied up at for most of the days. And so I will be back on Wednesday. But my coaches will be doing some Facebook Lives on some great topics next week. So please, if you're not on our email list, you will get notifications of our Facebook Lives. Hey, we're going Facebook this time. And you'll also get the replay in your email box. if you missed it. So if you're really enjoying these and you like this teaching and you don't want to have to go to Facebook and find the replay and you want to be on our mailing list, go to our brand new website at leslievernick.com.
Beautiful.
That's a brand new website. It just launched 2 weeks ago. We have a quick start guide on there if you are curious about how destructive your marriage is. Is it just difficult? Is it disappointing? Is it really destructive? There's a quiz that you can take. There's some videos that you can watch on this quick start guide that will really give you clarity right away. And then you're on our mailing list for emails, and then you'll get notified when the Facebook Live is coming and the replay. So, hey, you couldn't make it yesterday, but here's what Leslie and Susan talked about. You might want to watch this. And then you can decide that it's in your email box. So if you'd like to be notified that way, just go to my website and sign up for that quick start guide, or click the button, whatever it is, to give us your email, and you'll be all set. All right. So we will see you next week sometime. And if you haven't signed up for the webinar as well, that we only invite people to the webinar who want to come. And so if you want to come, you have to sign up for that so that we can let you know when it starts and give you the link to go there. We don't put that anywhere public because we don't want abusers showing up and creating havoc on the page. So for those of you who want to come and you have someone who in mind, you might want to also share the link with them. So thanks so much for being with us today. Happy weekend. Take care. Thanks, Susan. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Leslie.
Bye-bye.
Bye.